Welcome back to my channel, everybody. I'm Ethan Hoback, and I'm coming to you guys with a top 6 best movies of the year with 3 honorable mentions. Uh, so without further ado, let's get into this. So my first honorable mention is going to be Mortal Kombat. Uh, the movie itself wasn't very good from a critical standpoint, but it was a lot of fun to watch, and it was everything that I wanted from a Mortal Kombat movie. It was cheesy, it had good action, it had gore, it was R-rated. That's what I wanted to see out of it. And yeah, I just had a lot of fun watching it at the theater, but it was very slow paced at times, and towards the middle act of the movie, it started getting really slow, and it was just like a training montage that went on for too long. So all in all, that's why it made my honorable mentions, was because it was memorable enough for me to remember seeing it. Essentially, most of these movies did that and more, but that's what Mortal Kombat did for me. My second honorable mention would be Ghostbusters Afterlife. Now, okay, don't get me wrong, it was a good movie, but I did not see the original Ghostbusters before going in, so I didn't have that appreciation that would have given me a bias to rate it higher. So it was good. It exceeded my expectations because I thought it was gonna suck, but it didn't scratch any particular itches because I'm not a fan of the original Ghostbusters. Like I haven't seen it, so I truly wouldn't know. So as of right now, that's my standing on that particular movie, and that's why I made my honorable mentions. And my third and final honorable mention would be Fast 9. Now, that movie was god awful. Yeah, I know. From a critical standpoint, it did so much wrong. But the movie knows what it is, it knows what it's doing because it knows exactly what it's there for. Like it that's why they keep pumping these movies out. And it was enjoyable. It was fun. It was probably the most fun I've had in the theater this year. I went and saw it with one of my mates. We were just sitting there, with our popcorn laughing at the ridiculous stuff going on right in front of us, that physics defying stuff that that the Fast and Furious franchise is known for, and it was fun. That's all I could say. So now that we got the honorable mentions out of the way, let's get into the actual list. So at number 6, we got Nobody, starring Bob Odenkirk and some other people that I don't know of because it had a lot of B-list actors and uh, people that I don't particularly recognize other than Bob Odenkirk himself. And having watched Breaking Bad, seeing him in a role like in Nobody was a great treat to see. It was just like I didn't know what to expect going in because he's never played a role like that. He was always in Breaking Bad. He played Saul, who was a very charismatic but somewhat dirty lawyer. Uh, Not somewhat, very dirty lawyer, but that's besides the point. And if you weigh that performance versus his performance in Nobody, they're very different. So he did good for what was given to him, and the action was good. It was a fairly consistent movie, like with the action, but the acting was all right. The story was nothing new, and the villain was very very mediocre, I would say. He was not a very redeeming factor of the movie. It was just the fact that the action was good, and that's really all you're there for. So that movie did its job well, but it only did its job well. It didn't bring anything new. So that's why it's at the very bottom of my list. Next up, we got Free Guy with Ryan Reynolds and, again, some other actors that I can't really name off the top of my head right now, and I'm not going to waste your time with that. I'm just going to talk about the pros and cons of this movie like I am everything else. It was a lot of fun to watch. It was probably, I would put it really close to Fast 9 with how much fun I had watching it. And it had heart. That's the most important part of that particular movie, is it had heart, and it was more of a comedy than it was an action movie. The action at that point, you weren't really there to see it. You were there to see the character interactions and the heart that the movie had, and like all the references that they have because it's a video game movie. The concept of the movie is great. Like, I haven't ever seen a concept like that before, and they did it well. They Granted, they didn't knock it out of the park entirely, but I really liked the direction that they went in, and it was a fairly original movie, and that's really what got my attention when I went and saw it. And I'm really glad that I did get to go see it with my family, because the theater where I am shut down, so we had to drive off to another area to go see it. But it was a really worthwhile experience, and I would say Free Guy is definitely my number 5 pick. Number 4, we got Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Um, the MCU did not really have a memorable year in terms of movies up until that point, because that came out back in September, and up until that point, they didn't have a ton of good movies releasing this year. Like, Black Widow was delayed, but that didn't make my list, and for reasons that I'll go into in another video, whenever I discuss my worst movies of the year. Stay tuned. But back to that topic, Shang-Chi was kind of the first good MCU movie that I've seen this year, and it did a lot of things really well. It had really well choreographed action, a very original story, compared to other MCU movies. I mean, like, the plot itself is Marvel. There's nothing else to say about that. But the way that the lore unfolds, and like the new stuff that they're introducing into the movie, and like all the new concepts and everything, it's just very, very original. And I liked the way that they were bold. They were bold with it. They went in a good direction, I would say. And that, to me, is what made the movie stand out. Uh, yeah, it was just a good movie, and it did what it had to do well, and it did other things well too. So it added on top of what it was already doing. Granted, it wasn't perfect, but it's definitely one of my favorite movies this year. So that's my number 4 pick. Number 3, The Suicide Squad. Now, I might have a little bit of a bias towards this movie, just because I've been waiting for DC to actually, get their chops up. I know they have a lot of potential behind them. It's just they haven't been producing anything good. Wonder Woman 1984, which released all the way back at the end of 20, was one of the worst movies I've seen ever. Like, it was awful. It was I can't go into how horrible that movie was, because that's from another year, and that's interrupting the course of this. But just to emphasize, DC's not been doing well lately. So to see this come out was super fresh. Not only that, not only was it a good DC movie, but it was a good R-rated comic book movie. And I really like when R-rated comic book movies do well, because they're so few and far between. Like, you had Deadpool, which released all the way back in 2016. You had Logan, which released the next year, and then after that, they just stopped being as sporadic. So now they're not having R-rated comic book movies release so often now. But now they got James Gunn doing an R-rated Suicide Squad, and they knocked it out of the park. Honestly, it was so fun to watch. It didn't bring a lot of new stuff to the table, but it had good comedy, it had good action, it had gore, it had everything that I could have wanted out of an R-rated action comedy from DC and from James Gunn. It was like R-rated Guardians of the Galaxy, and it made me happy. And that's why it's my number 3 spot. I have a bias towards it because I've been waiting for a good movie from DC for a while, and it did what I wanted it to do. Now, my second pick will be No Time to Die. James Bond is a franchise that I have not really looked into at all. I hadn't seen really any other James Bond movies, not even the ones with Daniel Craig, obviously. before watching that movie. Suffice to say, if they did a good enough job to actually get me to like that movie without having known anything else about the James Bond franchise, means that they knocked it out of the park. That was my original pick before my number one pick came out, uh, and it was just a phenomenal movie. It had really good, Daniel Craig, as always, does a really good job. Um, every other actor just performed the heck out of this movie. It had really good grit and emotion to it, and it was a fairly personal story too. And that's what I liked the most about it, was that it was a very personal story, and it really hits home there. Granted, my one gripe with this movie, my one gripe was the fact that uh, Rami Malek's villain was not very redeeming. He wasn't a good factor of the movie just because of how do I put this? He just was very bland. Like out of a movie, I really want to see a good villain at least. And he didn't really scratch that itch. So everything else in the movie, from the acting to the action to the performances, were all done well except for that villain. And I guess that's why it made my number two. But it's a phenomenal movie, and I'd recommend seeing it. Now, my number one pick, I'm pretty sure most of y'all have seen this coming because, like I said earlier, No Time to Die was my favorite pick, which released only in October till this movie came out. And yeah, it's everybody's talking about it. Drum roll, please. Eternals. No, I'm lying to you. I'm joking. That movie is atrocious. Not going to talk about it right now. It's No Way Home. That movie did so much for me. I saw it just a couple days ago, and it's still rent free in my head. It's one of the best movies I've seen in a long time. Not even just this year, but in a long time. It is it's got me speechless. Like, in my head, I'm comparing it with Endgame. That's how well done it is. And it goes into bold territory that the MCU has never gone into. I'm not going to go in depth into it because that'd be spoilers, and you guys just need to go see the movie. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. It has almost no pacing issues. And I mean, I have a couple gripes with it, but like, the villains that come back are all really well casted. Obviously, I mean, it's the original cast for like the Raimi trilogy and the Mark Webb movies, but they're just like, the actors knock it out of the park, especially Willem Dafoe. He's one of the most redeeming factors of that movie, and you just got like super good performances all around. And the movie goes into not only not only multiverse territory that the MCU has not dared to go into, but it's also gone into dark places. Like, this movie was very, very mature. The way that it was done, the way that it was handled, the story that it's telling is so much deeper than just, fan service in a multiverse, like bringing back all the old villains and everything. It was so much more than that. And the fact that they were able to balance those two elements out makes it one of the best movies I've seen in such a long time. I would give it almost a perfect rating. It was the best theater experience I've had this year overall. It was really hard to get into, especially because seating was very limited, and right as they were getting my showing started, they were doing another showing at the time, and it wasn't completely over yet, so they didn't have the theater cleared out, and it was just like super hard to get into, but it was so worth it. So worth it. I implore you, anybody, if you haven't seen it yet, go watch it. Anybody who's watching this who hasn't seen this movie yet, go watch it. It is one of the best movies of the year. The best movie of the year, in my opinion. Yeah. Like, it was great. So, those are my picks. I had to do a top 6. It wasn't necessarily like it's not like a nice multiple of 5, or it's an even number, but it's not a multiple of 5, which makes no sense. But I had to squeeze a movie in there that I forgot that I saw this year, because I've seen a lot of good movies this year, but nothing great until No Way Home. So yeah, those are my picks. Those are my opinions on them. I did like a little mini review for basically each movie, and yeah, now you know my thoughts. Thanks for watching, guys.